Hopefully by now you're fully aware that our nervous system response is essential. We want our nervous system response to be most of the time in a rest and digest parasympathetic response. How do we know whether or not we're in this rest and digest nervous system response? Well, a big red flag, elephant in the room. How well are you sleeping? If you're not able to sleep well at night, it's a good indicator that your body's not feeling safe. Something is off. Dr. Elie Gottlieb is a sleep neuroscientist with over 10 years of sleep, circadian rhythm, and neuroscience research experience across academia, clinical neuroscience, and industry, Fortune 100, and startup. Currently, he leads applied sleep science at SleepScore Labs, a joint venture of ResMed leveraging validated non-contact consumer technology and ML-driven sleep improvement features to characterize and improve population sleep health. Prior to joining SleepScore, Dr. Gottlieb led a team of researchers at Johnson & Johnson working on the Lake Nona Life Project aimed at identifying health factors that contribute to long-term health and wellness. He remains a visiting researcher at the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and University of Melbourne in Australia, where he investigates associations between cerebrovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, and sleep-wake dysfunction. Hopefully, after listening to this, you're going to throw away all of the sleep supplements stacked on your bedside table and finally take your sleep into your own bed. This is the best thing ever. Okay,
Crazy.
big question. How do dogs affect your sleep? Do you
That's
think
so
this is
good.
helpful? Oh my gosh. Okay, if you're listening, you must look at the video because honestly, this is
Okay.
crazy. He's huge. This
That's
is
so
the
funny.
biggest dog I've
Well,
ever seen.
it's been raining nonstop here, so he has not gone out for a proper. We've gone like sprint walks, so like we'll go for like 20 minutes. I'm like potty, 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 or 20 seconds. I'm like potty, and then he quickly goes. We run back inside. So he has so much excess energy right now. Don't you, buddy? Don't you? Actually, there's actually a lot of research on um, pets and sleep. The crazy part is when we look objectively, I like how we're just going straight into this.
Well, I'm curious now. I feel
When
like
we look,
personally, when I'm dog sitting, the dogs are not helpful with my sleep,
yeah,
unfortunately. But if you
when,
happen
when, yeah, when we look objectively, and there hasn't been a ton of studies, but there have been a few studies, but when we look objectively at people's sleep, they're like what actually is happening is there's a increase in fragmentation. So like there's more wake after sleep onset, there's more periods of awakening, especially for my dog who like anytime he jumps on the bed, the earth shakes. So I can like feel him coming in, right? And then I'll wake up a little bit. But there is a discrepancy. So objectively, sleep slightly worsens, not by much. And this is, not across the board. If you have like a little chihuahua that just like gently gets in the bed at the side of the bed, I'm sure it's not a problem. But what we find what's really interesting is that self-reported sleep, which is weird, but self-reported sleep actually improves. So people feel that they sleep better with their dog. Um, but when we look objectively, that doesn't mirror up. So obviously we know of like there's a ton of like psychological benefits to pet ownership. So it makes sense that maybe what we're feeling doesn't necessarily mirror up to or match up to what's objectively happening to our sleep. And this is like a big problem in the sleep space in general. When we look at objective versus self-reported sleep, like that's why sleep trackers can be important. Just because you feel like you're getting a good night's sleep, you might be waking up periodically throughout the night because of something you didn't realize. Like I was living in a really populated area in the city when I was in Australia, and I didn't realize that the train was coming every single night at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I wake up like pretty tired. And then that's when I started using sleep technology. And I realized that every morning, every time at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was waking up for 5 to 15 minutes. And I started to look back and like reverse engineer it and saw that, well, yeah, because there's this train that just comes, specifically at that time. So,
That's really interesting. And I think it would make sense to me when it comes to being a pet owner that having that safety, that relaxation, that oxytocin release, I feel like that would totally help you sleep better. And
100%. Yeah. And again,
maybe,
it's a self-reported thing. So what's important to you? Is it, you know, the feeling of like, being cozy and comfy with your pet? And again, it's totally dependent on your dog. My dog is obviously gonna wake me up because he takes up half the bed. So
and it's so true what you're saying about self-reported versus the tracking. Like I
yeah,
had never tracked my sleep before I used the SleepScore app,
yeah,
and it was really crazy to notice like I thought that I was sleeping more, but I definitely wasn't. And there actually were times where it said that I was light sleeping, but I was certain I was awake. And then I was in my head, I was like, wait, was I asleep or was I awake? It's just so
yeah.
interesting to see that
It's
data.
we're just not good at remembering our sleep. Like we can like anecdotally report how much we slept, like let's say 6 to 8 hours, but it's really tough to get the nighttime awakenings right, to get the what's called sleep onset latency, which is the amount of time it takes to fall asleep. Like most people will either drastically underestimate or overestimate the amount of time it takes for them to fall asleep. So if you have something that can give you either a more like holistic picture of your overall sleep health, so the different domains of sleep health, how you're whether or not you're achieving your goals related to each of those domains, or just like a more objective measure, because we always say like if you want to improve something you have to measure it, you have to know where your
Yeah.
deficiencies are, at the very least. And it's especially the case for people who like wake up not feeling refreshed but don't really know why.
Mhm.
So is it because of the inconsistency, right? Is it your bedtime and wake time inconsistency? Is it the
They ate
is
too much before they went to bed.
is it, yeah, exactly. Is it the poor sleep efficiency? So you're in bed for 10 hours, but you're only spending seven of those hours asleep. Or is it just like you're just not sleeping enough? You're just sleeping only 4 hours. Like there's so many,
Mm.
sleep is not this binary thing. We're coming up with different dimensions of sleep health, the way we think of different dimensions of overall health. And each of those pillars of sleep health can have a drastic impact on obviously how we feel, how we're performing during the day, and they're all pretty different. They're differentially affected. So like you think of the inconsistency, the bedtime and wake time inconsistency. Most people are pretty inconsistent with their sleep patterns, with the bedtime and wake time. And what happens when you're very inconsistent, you get this like pseudo jet lag, right? Like if every single night you're going to bed an hour earlier or an hour later, and then what happens is it especially is the case over the weekend. So a lot of people, I think 60% of the population suffer from, what we call social jet lag, which is this like non-travel based jet lag, where what's happening during the weekday or during your work day drastically changes when you have your non-work day. So like me, if you want to go out over the weekend and you want to, finally hang out with friends after a long, work week, you're no longer going to bed at your traditional 10 p.m. time. Everything is shifting 2 hours, right? Like, so now on Friday, instead of going to bed at, let's say, 10 o'clock, you're going to bed at midnight or 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. And then your morning is shifted as well. And that's essentially jet lag. That's exactly what jet lag is, when your internal biological clock doesn't match up with your, the outside light cycle. So that's
So
just
you,
one dimension of sleep health, right? There's so many others.
yeah, and what we're talking about is the absolute foundation. Every single patient I meet with, I'm like, okay, how's your sleep? Because yeah, if they're waking up in the middle of the night, whatever it is, it could be I relate it to like maybe it's a vitamin D deficiency. Like maybe there's so much that could be going on,
Yeah.
especially yeah, hormonally balancing these things. Of course, if you're not sleeping well throughout the night, it's like a huge red flag that a lot of people ignore. But what tips do you have for this social jet lag? Do you have any hacks
No.
that you?
Yeah, it's so tough because I feel for people who have social jet lag, because they're not doing anything intentionally wrong. They're like, okay, now I have my off day, and now I can finally just like not. It's especially the case for night owls, so strong evening types who live in this early birds world. I'm one of them.
I'm
Um,
not. Yeah,
I
I
know you're not.
actually
We discussed this.
I
You're a
want to quickly
strong.
say I don't resonate with what you're saying when it comes to my social jet lag. I seriously just will, no matter what, wake up at like 6. Like even if I go to bed beyond midnight, I just cannot sleep in.
I am so impressed, and most people are not like you. We are very different. No, well, look, it's social jet. So what's happening with social jet lag is it's more of like it is really socially it's a social impact, right? Like you finally have a day off, so you're going to go out, you're going to just spend more time. Now maybe some people are not going out, they're just like, I don't need to go to bed at 10 p.m, so I'm gonna we call this bedtime procrastination. I'm gonna procrastinate my bedtime
Go
and do
down the rabbit hole of who knows what. Yeah.
exactly. So now they're in, now they're going to bed at midnight instead of 10 p.m. And that's still social related. Look, when it comes to the circadian rhythm and your sleep wake cycles in general, your brain adores consistency. And this is actually for most things in life. When we look across biology, consistency across behaviors is impactful across performance, mental health, right? So look, in an ideal world, you would just what, not go out with friends and not delay your bedtime and wake time. But obviously that's unrealistic for a lot of people. What you can do is, like, what we try to identify is what's the maximum amount of time you can get away with to push your bedtime and wake time. And what we generally find is most health outcomes really start to suffer when your social jet lag is over an hour, right? So when the delta between what you generally have been going to bed, what your general bedtime and wake time is versus what it is over the weekend is more than an hour. So if you can limit it to less than an hour, that's ideal. Or just try to keep if you know your bedtime is going to be delayed, then try to keep your wake time, your morning, routine, the same, right? So
Oh,
yes, you may
amazing.
be suffering a little bit by like getting less than what you traditionally get in terms of, sleep duration, but at least your bedtime and your wake time consistency is comparable. And
Should people take a
um,
nap? Like, are there things that people can do to? You do recommend taking a nap.
yeah, naps are, I was actually just thinking about this today. For the longest time, I always recommended 10 to 20-minute naps. And the
Oh.
reason for that is because we want to try to limit the effects of something called sleep inertia, which is that feeling of like grogginess when you wake up from too deep of a sleep or too long of a nap, right? And they've done studies on this. They've compared a 10-minute nap versus a 20-minute nap and then an hour nap. And what they generally find across the board really is that 10-minute naps provide a comparable level of cognitive boost to a 20-minute nap. So like probably just take a 10-minute nap, right? And that, it doesn't really take into account how long it takes you to fall asleep. So if you're really, really tired, your sleep latency, the amount of time it takes to fall asleep, might just be like
Yeah.
5 minutes. So get into bed, turn off the lights, set an alarm for 15 minutes later. That gives you 5 minutes to wind down, fall asleep, and then 10 minutes of the actual napping period.
This
Now,
latency? Oh, sorry.
yeah,
Go
with
ahead.
all that said, what the reason, for a long time, I didn't recommend a 1 hour nap versus a 10-minute nap is what I had mentioned, which is that sleep inertia. But what we're finding is that the ROI, the return on investment in terms of like the cognitive boost, is there with a 1 hour nap. So in other words, like you will suffer in the short term after a 1 hour nap. Some people might, because you're entering usually deeper sleep, you might wake up during REM sleep or deep sleep, both of which is not ideal when it comes to your sleep inertia. But the cognitive boost that you get after that, you get a bigger, right, cognitive boost than a 10-minute nap, right? So if you're okay with suffering the short term for 10 minutes to an hour, if you deal with that sleep inertia, the ROI is there. You'll experience that cognitive boost. Now, the only problem with naps is that, number one, it shouldn't replace a full nighttime sleep, right? Like your main nighttime sleep period should be where most of your energy is spent in terms of like, trying to perform at your best for that nighttime
Mhm.
sleep period. And in addition to that, you try not to have your nap too close to bedtime, because what happens is then you're interrupting your main nighttime sleep period, right? The longer you're awake, the more your body craves sleep. So if you're shortening that awakening time, your body's not going to crave that sleep period later on, during the night. So depending on your chronotype, if you're an early bird or a strong evening type like myself, I can probably get away with like a 3 to 4 p.m. nap because I'm a night owl. But if you're an early bird, you probably want to try to limit your nap to no later than like 1 to 2 p.m.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that this is something societally, napping in general seems lazy, not like you should chug some caffeine, get an espresso shot instead. And I say it over and over again to my clients, like, please, if you're tired, please sleep because there's
Yeah,
only so much
yeah,
caffeine that they can do to
it's
mask the.
it's true. And look, what's interesting is there are some sleep conditions actually where um uh, a some therapy actually says don't sleep. So, for example,
Really?
yeah, in chronic insomnia, one part of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is the gold standard treatment for insomnia, is something called sleep restriction. And I'm full transparency, I'm a PhD. I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not giving any medical advice. But if you have chronic insomnia and you go to get prescribed cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, what you might expect is something called, as I mentioned, sleep restriction, where you are restricting the amount of sleep someone gets to essentially train their brain that they can actually sleep, right? A lot of people with chronic insomnia say, I can't sleep. It's just not possible for me. Like I wake up I get into bed and I cannot fall asleep. Well, how do you train someone that they can actually sleep? By restricting, by sleep depriving them essentially, and restricting their bedtime and wake time to a certain period. Now, with all that said, that is not recommended for most of the population. Of course, that's only in a prescribed regimen with a physician's supervision. No one should be going out there and sleep depriving themselves. But
It's funny. What you're
but
saying is, sorry, go ahead.
but it is one way to prove to your brain that you can actually sleep.
Yeah, sorry, you're reminding me of myself. I was so proud of myself when we first met. I was like, oh, I fall asleep within like a minute. Like I have very short sleep latency, which was
Yeah,
confirmed from the SleepScore Labs. And I
yeah.
was so proud of myself. And you were like, wow, sounds like you're very sleep deprived. And
It
I was,
can be. Yeah. If you get into bed and you're immediately falling asleep, it can be a sign of sleep deprivation. The average sleep onset latency, most people take 12 to 20 plus, 20 minutes to fall asleep.
is
So
that
if you're,
healthy? Should it take longer?
um, yeah, for some people, there's a ton of individual variability, and I don't like to paint, any kind of broad, strokes, but like for most people, again, 12 to 20 minutes, if it's taking you an hour plus to fall asleep, um, what I generally recommend is, well, first of all, don't have a clock in your room. Like, because the
Interesting.
second that you start looking at the clock and you're like, oh, it's taking me 15 minutes, it's taking me 20 minutes, 25, 30, right? Like you start looking at your clock, and instead of focusing on winding down, your brain is focusing on time. And that's not what you want. But the general recommendation is like, if you're in bed and you're getting frustrated that you cannot fall asleep, get out of bed. Because what's happening is you're starting to associate the bed with things other than sleep and relaxation. You're associating with frustration of falling asleep, and this is like one of the first indicators of or first symptoms really of people who suffer from chronic insomnia. They've really started to associate the bedroom with stress and anxiety rather than relaxation and rest. So
Interesting.
any way to break that connection is ideal. And what does that mean for, like, pragmatically? Let's say I get into bed at 10 o'clock, and I get into bed because I know I should be getting to bed at 10 o'clock, but I'm not really tired, right? So I just like the lights are off, I've done my whole pre-sleep routine and ritual, but I'm not tired. So I'm in bed, my eyes are closed, but nothing's really happening. And then I'm like, this is taking longer than it should. So what do? I say, I'm not doing this right now. I'm gonna get out of bed and do something relaxing. So whether that's reading a book, you like everyone says, don't be on your phone. But if there is, I think, a misconception around technology use in sleep, where as long as you're using your device for your benefit and what you're looking for, then it can be great, right? There's tons of apps out there that are intended to help you relax before bedtime. So if you want to use one of those after you're struggling to fall asleep, you can, right?
As long as you have your blue light filter on.
I highly recommend a blue light filter, the night mode, or one of your blue light blocking lenses. Yes, good point. So yeah, get out of bed, go do something relaxing. Once you start to feel sleepy again, go back into bed. But keep your wake time the same, right? So even if you've pushed your bedtime a little bit forward, try to wake up at the same time the next day. And then you should feel sleepier the next day if you're a little bit more sleep deprived, and you'll be able to get to bed at your normal, traditional bedtime, which would have been that 10 p.m. in my example.
Interesting. Wow. I read that on the app, but I never actually followed that advice. And there's definitely some times where before I get my cycle, like there's different parts of my cycle where I notice it's like really, really hard to sleep. Getting out of bed isn't something that seems intuitive. Like it seems like, oh, why don't we just, I don't know, we try to fall asleep as hard as we can.
Yeah.
But instead of beating ourselves up about it, because myself included, and I'm sure you can relate, especially as this sleep specialist, how much pressure we can put on ourselves if we're like, why aren't I able to sleep right now? Um,
There
like,
is this, yeah, and it's a huge problem even in the sleep measurement space. People become obsessed about getting their ideal sleep score,
right.
um, and it becomes this competition. And for some personality types, that might be great, right? They benefit from that like hyper competitive, like I'm going to get more sleep than the other person. But I would say for most people, actually, it's might not be the preferred way, especially when it comes to sleep, where it's like it's really one of the main behaviors where you're trying to reduce that fight or flight stress response
Totally.
as much as possible. So
Which
anything
it
that you,
sounds like that does that when you're getting out of bed. You're like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna chill. Like I'm trying
yeah,
to rewire this, like, oh, I'm not getting that much sleep. I'm still gonna have a great day.
exactly. And they've done studies where they've actually like told people that they slept 8 hours despite them only sleeping 5 hours. And they had another group where they told them they slept 8 hours despite only sleeping 5 hours. And if you just tell people that they slept longer, their cognition will be improved, their mood and affect will be improved. So a lot of this is like,
Do
and
you
it's
do
a
that? Does the sleep score do that?
do not do that. We try to
It's
be as
actually accurate.
objective as possible. And you'll
I
see,
swear there were some days that happened to me. I was like, oh, I got terrible sleep and it gave me a good score. And I was like, oh.
well, it is something that I think all of consumer sleep tech is trying to balance. Like we don't want to, and it's like a UI UX problem too, especially like a user interface problem where all these consumer sleep tech companies are trying to be as least judgmental as possible. We're trying to like, okay, today's a tough day, you didn't get your best night's sleep, but that's okay. Tomorrow, tonight's another night, try again later. So I always say sleep and stress and anxiety are sleep's worst nightmare. So anything that you can do to limit that, even during the day,
Yeah.
especially at night, is ideal. And that's why, SleepScore, we put, recently created a generative AI mindfulness meditation feature in the app where you can, visualize your ideal dream,
I love it.
and it's cool, right? Like just something that improves that pre-sleep affect. And another just example is, obviously mindfulness meditation, but also gratitude journaling. There is a lot of research now coming out, and this is inspired, of course, from the field of positive psychology. Martin Seligman is like one of my favorite psychologists around who came up with this whole field of positive psychology, study of happiness, and um, in like Greek times we called it eudaimonia. Highly recommend people look all this up. But this field of positive psychology has given us some tools and solutions that might also impact sleep. Things like, as I mentioned, mindfulness meditation, gratitude, even like nostalgia. There's some research now showing that experiencing bits of nostalgia, happy nostalgia, might help us.
Interesting.
So it's not just like reducing stress and anxiety before bedtime, it's also feeling good, right? Like how do
Oh,
you
yeah.
feel good and a positive affect before bedtime? And there's, you know, a ton of ways to do that now.
This is so key. I think that our bodies are absolutely brilliant. And if we're not able to sleep, it makes sense. It's this primitive, like, I must not be safe. I obviously shouldn't be sleeping, right? If
Yeah.
we're in this. And our bodies, I love this, the meditation. I did use it on the app. I feel like it's so, so fun. I love it so much. Um,
Awesome.
but yeah, our physiology doesn't know the difference between what we're looking at and what we're imagining. So if we
Totally.
can really get ourselves to imagine, it's cool. I haven't heard the idea of like nostalgia being brought back to an actual memory. Or I
Yeah.
love visualization practices. I actually love practicing visualizations in the future of like what's possible. And then you'll
Yes.
wake up feeling like even more excited to go after your goals because you have this vision of already accomplishing your goals. I love that so
Exactly.
much.
Exactly. And you know, it is this developing, we're trying to come up with new innovative solutions around the pre-sleep experience, but also the daytime experience that will support sleep later on. Because, you know, sleep is not something that just happens in the three, you know, preparing for sleep shouldn't just happen in the 3 to 4 hours before bedtime. It happens like really as soon as you wake up. So what you do from the time that you wake up to the time that you fall asleep really all can impact your sleep, from, you know, obviously caffeine consumption, alcohol consumption, but also stress during the day. And one thing about the positive affect thing is it is this like pretty interesting but vicious cycle where feeling, of course, stress and anxiety and negative emotion before bedtime. Ozzy, buddy, your dad's doing a podcast.
So cute. I love it.
um, Feeling stress and anxiety before bedtime obviously impacts your sleep, but it might also differentially affect the amount of REM sleep that you're getting throughout the night.
Interesting.
And why REM sleep is really important is because we've shown that REM sleep in particular is really important for emotional regulation. So if you selectively sleep deprive someone of REM sleep, there are some cognitive outcomes that are remain, you know, the same. But what's really impacted is our emotional regulation, and our ability to adapt, our ability to emotionally um, uh, uh, you know, be sort of in tune with what's happening in that moment. And what it's really called emotional reactivity. So like whenever someone says just sleep on it, right? Like if it's a big important decision and you're sleep deprived, um, sleep on it, and maybe make sure you get sufficient REM sleep, because that's what's really important for the, you know, reactivity of emotions and how we, you know, might react to certain things that are emotionally required.
Wow. And everything you said, I just quickly want to say you've inspired me. I've been doing my best to see the sunrise as often as possible and like
Hey.
see some natural light in the morning. I feel like that actually, like your circadian rhythm, oh my gosh, getting that natural light. But coming back to what you just said, how can we improve our REM sleep? Like, is there a way to
Yeah.
differentiate between actually being able to drop into deep sleep and REM sleep or
Yeah. This is a tough one. And I don't love to talk about sleep stages in particular because unfortunately there's sleep staging, and it's in many ways out of our hand. It depends on what we're doing the day before. It depends on if you've worked out, right? If you've exercised a lot, if you haven't exercised, caffeine consumption, medication use, sunlight, consistency.
what if you pop some melatonin? Will that help?
It will not help. The problem with melatonin, we've had this lengthy
Yeah.
discussion. But just real quick, I'll get back to melatonin in a second. But just real quick about the REM sleep thing and deep sleep in as well, because everyone's trying to increase the amount of deep sleep they get and increase the amount of REM sleep they get. for most healthy people, their sleep staging is already, finely tuned. The body is pretty good at recognizing what it needs and when. So, for example, there's a ton of research now coming up on what's called local sleep, where different parts of the brain are sleeping in essentially different ways. It is super interesting. They've done studies now where, depending on what you did during the day, if you've worked the area of the brain that's responsible for balance, you might have differential sleep in your cerebellum versus other parts of your brain. So the whole brain isn't sleeping the same. In some ways, we're kind of sleeping like dolphins, where one hemisphere sleeps in a different way than the other hemisphere. It's really cool. If you haven't looked up dolphin sleep, highly recommend. So
Interesting.
cool.
I haven't heard.
But when it comes to sleep stages in particular, it's really just about maintaining optimal sleep health, right? And maintaining what we call sleep hygiene 101, right? Limiting caffeine intake in the 8 hours or so before your bedtime, limiting alcohol consumption, bedtime and wake time consistency. Actually, consistency is one of the best things that you could do for giving your body ample time to reach those sleep stages that are really important.
And you said 8 hours? Like that's like the gold standard, you would say?
For most people, I would say, obviously, everyone's metabolism of caffeine is a little bit different, but generally, the half-life of caffeine, the amount of time it takes your body to metabolize 50% of caffeine, is about 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours. So if you're going to bed at 10 p.m., try to have your last cup of coffee by 2 p.m.
Oh, if you're a fast metabolizer.
If you're a fast metabolite, and that's 50%, right? Like that still means that there's the half-life, right? So 50% of it is still being metabolized after that time. So
But sorry, I meant like 8 hours for people to really try to be asleep.
so like 8 hours after, from the time that they've had a cup of coffee until their actual bedtime, you mean?
No,
No.
okay. Well, with that, this is actually, I wasn't asking that, but I think it's really interesting. Like, I recommend in general, people don't eat any caffeine after 11 a.m.
Okay.
And for
Yeah.
me, I definitely will not be able to sleep. Like, I did a DNA test. I am a slow metabolizer of caffeine. It stays in my
Yeah.
system for over 30 hours, and it's absolute BS. So I cannot mess with caffeine.
No
But
caffeine.
what I was curious about um, is it possible to get a good score and get less than 8 hours of sleep?
Oh, yes and no, right? Like in general, the healthy recommendation for most people is 7 to 9 hours. That's what the American Academy of Sleep Medicine recommends. There are what we call the sleepless elites. This is less than 1%, well, depending on the study that you look at. There is a genetic phenotype where it's associated with no impairment in cognition for those sleeping less than 5 hours. They
Wow,
are
the
extreme.
sleepless elites.
They are, I want to highlight, they are extremely rare. If you think that you can get away with less than 5 hours and have no effect on your cognition, there is less than a 1% chance that that's the case, right? Like, if you've banked up on a ton of sleep, if you've been sleeping 8 hours consistently over a long period of time, and then one day you get 4 hours or 5 hours of sleep, you're probably going to be okay, right? The problem is for people who consistently get 4 to 5 hours of sleep, and then they've habituated to this feeling of like sleep deprivation, and they think, oh, I'm fine, like I'm okay. What probably has happened is you've gotten used to being sleep deprived. It's the same way with people who have obstructive sleep apnea, and they're like, they don't know that they have obstructive sleep apnea, that they are choking throughout the night, and they stop
Oh,
breathing throughout the night for up to 40 to 50 minutes per hour, and they think that that's the norm. And then one day they get treated with CPAP, which is the gold standard treatment for obstructive sleep apnea, and they're like, "Oh my god, my brain is not foggy. I can see clearly now. Right, the rain is gone." It's like a totally different. So what I would, the general recommendation around sleep duration is 7 to 9 hours. You can have a couple, like no one's perfect. You're going to have nights where you sleep less than 5, less than 6. But be careful. There are studies showing that if you're sleeping less than 4 hours, it's comparable to a blood alcohol content level that's double the legal limit. So
what?
be very careful driving. Yeah. Like you might as well be drunk, right?
Oh,
So be very careful when you're driving, especially your reaction time. Micro sleeps are a big issue. It
interesting.
costs the US economy, I don't remember the number exactly, but billions of dollars a year on sleep deprivation, on the amount of accidents and healthcare utilization that occurs as a result of sleep deprivation. So be very
Wow.
careful if you're sleeping less than 6 hours, or even if you banked on a ton of sleep, if you've been sleeping consistently 8 hours, but then one night you've slept less than four, um, be very careful getting behind,
I
the
can't imagine. And I feel
yeah.
like everyone can relate to this. Okay, if you're really not getting good sleep, you're probably going to be a little depressy, a little irritable, a little, craving all of the chocolate. Uh,
Yeah, leptin
it's
and ghrelin. That's the one. Like when you're sleep deprived, what's one of the? It's such a cool area because there's been a ton of like causal research on what happens to hormonal levels when your body is sleep deprived. And yes, your the sort of physiology is drastically changed when you're sleep deprived. Your body craves sugary sweets, carbohydrates,
yeah.
in
And
particular. And
when I'm
yeah,
sleep deprived with my glucose monitor on, no matter what I eat, my blood sugar will spike. My
there you
body's
go.
like, it's just crazy.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it
that's
is.
why
It really is the foundation. Like
it
sleep health
is.
foundation, and there's so many bi-directional relationships where we're finding, for example, when it comes to to performance and exercise, like on one hand, sufficient exercise improves sleep, sleep improves exercise performance, reduction
Yeah.
of injury. So it goes both ways. Like so many of these different pillars for health are affected in bi-directional ways, and that's
Yeah. And
it's
being
really
able to
exciting for us.
recover, like I remember, I know you work out. I remember reading research a while
Yeah,
ago that if you're sleep deprived, of course you're going to be a lot more likely to put on fat and have it be less, like if you're trying to lose weight, you're probably going to lose more muscle than fat. If you're,
exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, there's research showing that people who are not sleeping sufficiently, they're more likely to lose muscle and gain fat, despite
right.
exercising the same amount. So yes, that is a huge, developing area, and that's why it's just so important to allow yourself the sleep opportunity window. Like going back to sleep duration, you can't sleep 8 hours if you're only in bed for six, so you have to give yourself that sleep window opportunity, right? So many
Yeah.
people are like, I don't know how
It
to
seems
sleep
so
more. I'm like,
obvious, but a lot of people aren't doing it.
yeah, it's like reverse engineer it. Like if
Yeah.
you want, if you're a night owl like myself and you want to try
Okay,
to
you keep saying you're a night owl. I'm like, wait a second. Is this okay? Can we like really cut night owls a break? I have night owl friends that are so hard on themselves and they're like, oh, Katie, I need to go to bed at this time and wake up at this time. And it's just like
uh,
so always a goal for them to wake up earlier and be morning people. But it's just, yeah, is it just okay to be like, I'm a night owl and this is my chronotype and I'm rocking it?
good question. This is so hard because on one hand, we live in a society that values the traditional 9 to 5
So,
work schedule and even like social schedule, right? Like I have a ton of meetings, like pre-work meetings with friends at like 8 a.m. because everyone is right. So like it's so difficult for a night owl to go to sleep at midnight and wake up at 8 because they need to be somewhere at 8 a.m. Right. And if you're a strong evening type, in an ideal world, you're probably going to bed at 1 a.m. and waking up at 9 a.m. And there are evolutionary advantages to strong evening types and strong morning types. Back in the day, strong evening types would look over the tribe while everyone else was sleeping, and that's why men are more likely to be strong evening types than women. So
so
that's just
interesting.
interesting tidbit. Yeah, like even at my gym, there's classes in the morning. There's like 6 a.m. classes, and I think it's exclusively women. And in my evening gym class, which is like 5 to 6 p.m. Almost exclusively men. So there are
Fascinating.
a ton of sex specific differences when it comes to sleep as well. We haven't even covered. But if you are a strong evening type and you just can't, it's just not working for you, right? Like your work schedule doesn't allow you to wake up late and go to sleep late. There are some protocols based on some existing research that have shown to safely and effectively advance the circadian rhythm, so pushing everything back essentially. And they're not fun, right? Essentially, it's like set your wake up time for, generally whatever it is that you want. Although I highly recommend that you do it in 15-minute increments every day. So if you're waking up at 10 a.m. but you want to be a 7 a.m. sleeper or waker upper, wake up time, waker
Got
upper,
it. Yeah.
start draft, slowly do it 15 minutes at a time. So the first day 9:45, then 9:30, and then eventually get to where you want. The big thing, as you mentioned earlier, is sunlight exposure, right? So sunlight really strongly is it's actually the strongest environmental cue that influences our circadian rhythm. We call it a Zeitgeber. So it's one of the strongest environmental cues that influences circadian rhythm, in addition to physical activity, our eating cycle. So as soon as you wake up in the morning, bright sunlight. If you don't have any bright sunlight near you, or it's a cloudy day, there's a ton of light therapy glasses that are essentially shining bright light into your eye in a healthy and safe way.
Wow.
You might want to try that. And then physical activity is the big one. So, which is not fun, right? Like in these studies,
We
they had
love
night,
physical activity.
but for night owls, it's not fun to do it in the morning, first thing when you wake up, right? Like this is my nightmare. The
I
protocol in this
love it.
in
Yeah.
the research studies were like, have everyone wake up super early, bright light exposure, and then go on a treadmill for an hour.
Right,
and
right. For
and
a whole
then
hour.
I think it was between 30 minutes to an hour.
I
So for these,
swear, if you the sunrise hikes around here, like if
oh,
you it
incredible.
yeah, it makes you a morning person. Or at least for me, it's just I feel like I crave it. Those it's so fun. So
It's
just saying. It doesn't
beautiful.
have
Yeah,
to be miserable, I hope. Well,
some of my fondest memories were when I was in Australia, actually New Zealand in particular. Oh, this was no, in Tasmania, where we did a sunrise hike. Took like 3 hours. I think we discussed this probably. Took like 3 hours to get to where we're going. So I woke up at like, I don't know, 4 a.m. And then seeing that sunrise is such a, for someone who doesn't usually see it. So if you're a strong evening type who doesn't usually see the sunrise like this, what better way to do it than on a sunrise hike? Wake up super early, see that, but just get ready. You're going to be exhausted during the day.
or you don't have to wake up at 4 a.m., hopefully. Like
Yeah,
I'm
not
lucky
4
enough
a.m.
to live really close to at the moment. I'm really close to these incredible sunrise hikes and I don't have to wake up at 4 a.m.
Must
But
be nice, Katie. We're jealous.
I know. Well, no, don't be jealous. It's freaking freezing over here. I'm so jealous of you right now. Um, gosh, well, it looks like we're already out of time. Anything that you feel like you'd like the people to know that we didn't happen to cover? Any last?
Sure.
Oh, the
Yeah.
melatonin we didn't, but
Oh, melatonin we didn't cover. In short, be very careful with melatonin because it's in the United States, it's not, there's limited FDA regulation around supplements, all supplements in particular, or none in particular, but supplements in general. And there have been studies showing that when they look at the actual dosage of what's being sold as melatonin here in the United States, the dosage ranges from -70% to what's on the bottle's actual label to plus essentially 500%. So if you
oh
think
my
you're getting
gosh.
a 5 milligram melatonin gummy, it could be upwards of 30, 40, 50 milligrams, which is like hundreds of thousands times what the body naturally produces. So be very careful with melatonin supplementation. They also found that 30% of melatonin supplements contain serotonin in them, which is, it can be in high enough doses can actually be lethal.
What?
And most healthy people probably don't require melatonin supplementation. It's currently only really validated in use for people with circadian rhythm disorders, and then also for jet lag. So, of course, if you're jet lagged and you're trying to match up your internal biological clock with the time and sunrise and sunset of where you're now at, melatonin can support that. But its use really doesn't extend beyond circadian rhythm issues. For most healthy people, there are, of course, some pediatric populations, like those with autism, and some older populations who are no longer able to endogenously create melatonin.
Interesting.
The pineal gland in the brain is one of the first organs in the body to calcify. So older, populations might actually benefit from melatonin supplementation, but that really does, it is a hormone. Like, it's not just this, like, it's not nothing. So I
Yeah.
highly recommend that you speak with your doctor about supplementing with melatonin, and also get the dosaging right, because most of the studies showing its efficacy are in very small doses. So 1.5 milligrams, no more than 3 milligrams. And we have dosages here in the United States that range from 5 to 10 milligrams, which is, again,
Yeah.
thousands of times more than what the body endogenously produces. So it's unnecessary for most people.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like in the biohacking space, people have been uh hyping up melatonin to help with biological age and that kind of thing. But that's for
Yeah.
a whole nother discussion. Thank
Yeah,
you.
there is some research on it, but that's, yeah, definitely for another discussion.
Yeah, I really do want to help people create their own melatonin and yeah, go outside, get that circadian rhythm in sync with the sun. I feel like it's going to
Yeah,
be a lot easier to create your own melatonin that way. Make sure you're not vitamin D deficient.
yeah.
Um, these
And
things.
the and the best way to do it is actually just darkness. So melatonin is called the hormone of darkness for a reason. So if you want to produce melatonin, make sure you're in a dark room, or like close your eyes. Your body will start to release melatonin. So it's you don't eat, most people don't need it from an external source. Their body's well equipped to make it.
Interesting. Wow, yeah. With my bathroom lights, I actually unscrewed a bunch of them, especially at night in case. Do you think that makes a difference to mess with your?
It can. So if you're really, people say avoid blue light before bedtime, which I highly recommend, but it's any bright light source. It's
Mm.
not just blue light. If your red light is bright enough, it's going to suppress the release of melatonin. So any kind of darkness that you can get in and around the bedroom is ideal. That's why I generally recommend blackout blinds. In a perfect world, you'd have blackout blinds that automatically open once
Ooh,
your alarm
with the
goes off,
sun.
so you get darkness at night, but brightness first thing in the morning. But yeah, any kind of darkness that you can get in the really 3 to 4 hours before bedtime. I mean, just if you're an early bird, you have the luxury of generally mirroring the sunrise and sunset. So as the sun sets, try to have something similar in and around your home. So start to dim start to dim your light in and around the bedroom at around, depending on what time your sunset is. And there's actually a ton of circadian lighting interventions now out there. I think the Philips Hue lighting offers like a circadian lighting setting where it mirrors the sunrise and sunset. Your computer will have something similar. There's an app called Flex, or you could just use the night mode on your computer that takes into account the time of day, the sunrise and sunset, and starts to change the hue of the screen. So
So good. All right,
those
everyone, don't be creeped out when there's just lots of candles all over my house and my room after 6 p.m. It's like all of a sudden it's like a witchy candlelit.
creepy dungeon.
Yeah, my candlelit dungeon after the sun goes down. Oh man, there's so much we could talk about. I know you have so much
No,
wisdom on Alzheimer's and dementia, and there's
yeah.
so many tips and so much. Oh, but
Let's
yeah.
do it again soon. Let's plan a longer session where we can go into like some hardcore data, maybe around similar topics that were similar to my talk at the Buck Institute around sleep and longevity, and some of the data showcasing really sleep's bidirectional effect on longevity. So
Gosh,
yeah,
yeah.
love it.
And how can people, if at all, reach out to you or read the
Yeah,
I know the SleepScore Labs, it's amazing, this free app. You don't need to get an Aura ring, but I actually did get an Aura ring and I compared the two and they're pretty much the same. I was amazed at how accurate it was.
awesome. Yeah, so you can download the SleepScore app on your smartphone. available across all iOS and most Android. Essentially, the premise of the SleepScore app is that first and foremost, we're all about data and science and validating our technology against the gold standard, which is called polysomnography. And to my knowledge, we're one of the only widely available sleep apps that show overall accuracy relative to the gold standard of 85+%. So very accurate, especially since it doesn't require any specialist hardware. You don't need to wear a ring. And really the differentiator for our app is that we're totally non-contact. So if you don't like wearing an Oura or you don't like wearing an Apple Watch, before bedtime or during your sleep, and you want some kind of non-contact solution, this is where like the form factor is preferred by a lot of people. So it's yeah, and really we're not just a measurement app, we're a sleep improvement app. So we take all of the data that we objectively capture from your previous night's sleep, and use that as part of our sort of what we call advice engine to provide you with personalized and dynamic recommendations to just go beyond, right? So like, who cares if I slept 5 or 6 hours? If you're not going to tell me how to improve it, then that can give me stress and anxiety. So we really try to just provide recommendations to all of our users based on cognitive behavioral science, sleep and circadian hygiene, and aspects of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So if you
Yes, I
have
love the personalized meditation on there. It was so cute. It literally created me this meditation vision that I asked it to create. I know you have to go, and I apologize we went over time, but
oh,
thank you so, so, so much. This was
thank
amazing.
thank you so much for having me, Katie. It's been a lot of fun.
And happy February, my one of my favorite months because no, not because of Valentine's Day, because February 26th is Pistachio Day, and pistachios happen to be the best source of naturally occurring melatonin. So go ahead, buy some pistachios. I'm pretty sure no matter what time of day it is, that's going to be able to help your sleep a little bit. And I'm sure there's so much more that Dr. Elie Gottlieb could share. Go to PubMed. He's got a lot of research published in there. It's absolutely incredible. Let us know what you're going to do differently around your sleep habits thanks to this conversation. I'm very curious. And if you have any specific questions, please don't hesitate to send me a DM at vitamin.katie, and you can follow Dr. Elie Gottlieb. I'll put all of that information on him down below, and sleep well tonight, all right? Much love to you. Bye.